Across the centuries comes this exciting story of a modern girl cursed by an ancient legend. The legend of the cat people. Women whose kiss means death, whose love turns them into vicious, snarling beasts of prey.
Twice I've been followed by something that was not human, something that attempted to take my life. I believe that was the cat form of Irena.
Why should she wish to harm you?
Because I'm in love with her husband. It's shut, Val. Just a minute ago, it was open.
It's locked. Leave us, Irena.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Saturday Matinee, presented by Denver Public Library. Today, we will begin with a brief land acknowledgement. This is a way for us to honor the indigenous people and return the narrative back to the original stewards of this land. We recognize that we are occupying indigenous land in America that is now called Colorado and was historically inhabited by 48 contemporary tribal nations, specifically Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people. 574 federally recognized tribes exist in the United States. We commit to disrupting invisibility and ongoing erasure of indigenous communities. We want to express our gratitude for the ability to live and meet on these territories and for the past and current contributions of indigenous people. This morning, we are discussing 1942 cat people. Please submit your questions and comments in the chat, and we will ask the most relevant ones to our panel in the last 10 to 15 minutes. This discussion is indeed being recorded, will be available for delayed viewing on YouTube in good time. Nothing apart from host and panelist videos is captured or posted, so be sure to keep your microphone off until the end. My name is Daria. Our co-host's name is Andrew. Please message us directly if you're having technical issues. We'll do our very best to assist you. And now, please give it up for our panel. Film critic Walter Chaw and filmmaker and screenwriter Richard Kelly.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Really excited about our show today because I adore our guests, obviously. I love Richard Kelly. I love Richard, great guy, and a brilliant filmmaker. And I love Val Lewton. I love Val Lewton's films. His 11-picture run with RKO Studios in the 1940s is legendary. It is an unbelievable string of uninterrupted creativity and I would say success. One banger after another, as the kids say these days. If you follow along with us in this series, you've heard me talk a little bit about the Gothic tradition and literature as it seeps into movies, with Rob Savage and The Innocents, and also with Edgar Wright with Blood and Black Lace. So rather than rehash a lot of that stuff, talking about the monk and the mysteries of Udolpho and Frankenstein, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, all of those things, rather than going through that again, let's talk a little bit about Val Lewton. Lewton was born in Yalta in what is now the Ukraine, right on the Black Sea. And it matters because he was sort of raised on a diet of folklore and fairy tales of the region. He was an autodidact. He read tirelessly. He was a very cultured man. He loved the opera. He loved the theater. He was a poet. He wrote poetry. He says very bad poetry. He wrote novels too. He used to joke that RKO hired him because someone told them that he wrote horrible novels, and they thought that they had said he wrote horror novels. I've read one of his novels. It's not horrible. It's pretty interesting, actually, especially if you know about Val Lewton's work as a producer. He was the nephew to the legendary stage actress Nazimova. And she was a doyen of the stage, and she was sort of the person that brought he and his mother, Val and his mother, over to the United States. She was the sponsor for them to come over. He came over. He started working for another boy genius named David O. Selznick. over at MGM, and they worked together on a lot of stuff. Val Lewton was the second unit on A Tale of Two Cities, where he met another young aspiring director named Jacques Tourneur, who was working there at the same time. He was really valued by O. Selznick, and as a script editor, as a person to bounce ideas off of. They were working closely together on a movie that you might have heard of called Gone with the Wind, when RKO, having been stung, the small studio, having been stung by a couple of major box office failures that almost sank them into bankruptcy, said, you know what we need is we need to stop sucking up to people like Orson Welles, and we need to start figuring out how we can make movies on the cheap and as quickly as possible. They fired their head, and they hired a guy named Charles Kerner. And Kerner had a new motto for RKO when he took over in the early 1940s. His motto was showmanship over genius. And that's sort of, when we talk about Hollywood as a synecdoche, when we say Hollywood is this or Hollywood is that, we usually follow it with something like that, to say, Hollywood's all about, spectacle. It's not about art anymore. All Hollywood does is XYZ, and all Hollywood does is sequels and remakes and all of that really facile garbage that people say to seem like they know something about movies. It's always been thus. And so it was explicitly for RKO in the 1940s with Charles Kerner, spectacle over genius. And one of the first things that they did was they created a horror section, because they looked over at Universal with Frankenstein's and Bride of Frankenstein's and The Wolfman, which came out in 1941. And they said, they're making these cheapo, dumb movies, these horror movies that the kids love and adore. And for some reason, to make all this money, we're going to do this ourselves. We're going to start, and we're going to combat the Universal monster tradition. By the 1940s, Universal monsters had become kind of a joke. The Frankenstein was meeting Abbott and Costello, and they were having all these team ups. It's like the Avengers. It's a joke. All these monsters were teaming up together. The Wolfman and Frankenstein and the Mummy, they're all in the same castle, and all this shenanigans are happening. It's the Monster Mash, and it was kind of a cultural thing. It was softening. It was no longer the deep gothic of the early 30s for the Universal monsters. So they hired Val Lewton. He was the guy with the ideas. He was the guy that could get things done really quickly. And they said, Val, we want to make you one of the studio heads. And Val Lewton, of course, is like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Yes, a dream come true. I will do good for you. I swear. And they said, Charles Kerner and his team said, but here's some guardrails for you. Before we give you the keys to the kingdom, they come with a price. And here's the price. The first guardrail is we will give you the titles of the movies that you make. You will have nothing to do with the titles. We're going to give you the titles, and you're going to make a movie based on that. And Val Lewton said, that's ridiculous. But okay, head of the studio, yes. Second guardrail is you can't spend more than maybe like $150,000 per movie. Your budget will be $150,000. And even by the standards of that time, that is a ridiculously small amount of money to make a film, start to finish. And Lewton said, that is impossible, but I'm still listening. The third guardrail was that none of the movies could be longer than about 75 minutes, because they wanted to be able to program these movies as many times as possible in one day to make as much money as possible. And so Lewton said, okay, so I can't come up with my own titles. I have a very limited budget, meaning that I will probably only have 2 weeks per movie to make these movies, to keep everybody, working and everything. So I only have 150 grand, and they have to be really short. It's a deal. And so he came over to RKO, and the first title that they gave him to combat, the Wolfman and the Bat, and these great Universal horror titles, they said, your title will be, picture it, Val, Cat People. That's right, Cat People. Go forth. So he went forth, and he assembled around him a team of people that he knew could work really quickly and really well. He recruited the screenwriter DeWitt Bodine, who really knew his stuff and knew how to produce quickly, and was kind of already simpatico with Val Lewton. He hired Jacques Tourneur, crucially Jacques Tourneur, and said, man, these are the guardrails. What do you think? And he made a movie under budget for $135,000 in about 10 days. It was Cat People, and when it was released, it was huge. It did huge business. It single-handedly resurrected RKO's financial fortunes. It was so successful that they called him in, the night of the premiere, they called him in and they said, hey, Val, your next project, picture it, Val. I Walked with a Zombie. Now, here's the thing about Val Lewton that's really interesting is that given all of these lurid titles, the one after I Walked with the Zombie is The Leopard Man, to recapture some of the magic of cat people. You get it? Leopard Man. One of the real beauties of Val Lewton was that he never abandoned his roots in folktale and mythology, fairy tales, and art. His last movies, Isle of the Dead and Bedlam, were based on paintings, famous paintings that he had hanging in his office. He was a poet. He was a storyteller first and foremost, and he never abandoned that. And when he was told to make a movie called I Walked with a Zombie, it was before modern conceptions of zombies. It was still sort of steeped in the Caribbean and voodoo. He, instead of giving them what they thought that they were asking for, he gave them a movie that was essentially a retelling of Jane Eyre with heavy colonial aspects, colonialism aspects attached to it on a Caribbean island. It is gorgeous. Another Jacques Tourneur film. It is gorgeous and not what you think it is. Just like Cat People is gorgeous and entirely not what you think it is. For today's purposes, we're doing Cat People. Richard Kelly's brilliant choice today. And he also chose, sort of on his own to watch the sequel, The Curse of the Cat People, which came out in 1940. I said 45. I think it's 44, actually. It came out relatively soon after Cat People, which I think is the best movie that he made during his RKO run. And all of them are good. But I love Curse of the Cat People. It is a masterpiece. And then we're going to talk a little bit even about Paul Schrader's 1982 remake of Cat People, which is completely wrong in every possible amazing way. It's fucked up beyond description. Okay, so that's enough of me. Let me introduce our guest today. I first saw Donnie Darko in 2000 on a VHS screener tape. That's right. A VHS is a cassette on which magnetically you kind of imprint. It's like a cassette. It's an old technology. I don't want to. Anyway, it would take too long to explain it to everybody. So I watched it on a VHS tape, and then I watched it again, and then I called my wife in the room, and I said, I just watched this movie twice back to back. I want to watch it again with you. And we watched it again, and I cried every single time because I'm at the exact age of the main character, Donnie Darko. All of the musical cues, all of the things that are happening, all the mood of it, the way that the mother, Mary McDonald, is reading it on the morning that Donnie comes back from sleeping out on the on the side of a mountain, actually on a mountain path. All of it rang unbelievably true to me. And I was like, who the hell is Richard Kelly? And it began sort of this series of questions in my mind about who this person could be, who should have asked for royalties rights for my life and my emotional life, because he captured it so completely with Donnie Darko, in the sense that you are involved in something greater than yourself. You're involved in a grander storyline, that you are perhaps, maybe the world's better off without you, that you could be the hero of your life if you wanted to be. All of these issues around depression, around being a teenager, around all these things, being misunderstood, being the guy who read Graham Greene and understood it, all of those things he captured in his movie. Who could this person be? He made a movie 5 years after that called Southland Tales, which had kind of a notorious debut at Cannes, and I think widely misunderstood at the time of its release. It was imagined to be the last 3 volumes of a 6-volume story, the first 3 of which are in an amazing series of graphic novels that he wrote for the film. Southland Tales is now, in my mind, prophecy. 15 years later, everything that he's talked about in that movie has come true. The uncut Cannes version of it is now available through Arrow on Blu-ray. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I don't know what to say about it. It's prophecy. It's brilliant. And I think I would say the same thing about Richard. He gets it on a molecular level, and the things that he has written about and things that he does are all complicated and ambitious and expensive and almost impossible to see come to fruition. But when he gets to, it's a little glimpse of the future. So I'm so excited to welcome our guest today. Everybody, please give a show of jazz hands. Here's Richard Kelly. Hey, Richard.
Hello. Thank you, Walter, for what a lovely introduction. we got to meet in person. I think it must have been 4 or 5 years ago, when we were doing one of the anniversary. I've kind of been caretaker to my first film, to Donnie, because there's been a lot of I relinquished the rights to Donnie Darko when I was 23 years old, believe it or not, when I sold the screenplay. When you sell your screenplay to get to direct your first movie at like 24, which is insanely too young, you lose all the rights, you sign away everything, So I've been kind of trying to be caretaker to the movie, and we've done some re-releases and restorations and stuff, and so I've been out there traveling all over to kind of reclaim what was originally mine and try and secure it with a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. But Walter is one of many generous supporters who has hosted me in his home city, of Denver, and it was a wonderful visit that we had, and to get to talk about movies and just to listen to Walter just elaborate is just wonderful to hear. Just there's this rich understanding of film history, and I learned so much listening to what Walter has to say, and it's just great to be here to talk about Cat People and talk about Val Lewton and just the origin of so many things in Hollywood that kind of began with this film and the RKO sort of era, and just the patterns that we see kind of replicated today in Hollywood. And so many things that Walter was talking about that were happening at the beginning of the 1940s, they're happening again today in so many different kind of twisted ways. But we can get into all that, and happy to let Walter lead the discussion, which we could talk, I'm sure, for hours, but
Well, let's just start with Cat People. Let's start with why you thought. I usually start with why you chose this movie, and you kind of articulated that. But let's start instead with, why do you think this was such a big deal in 1942? What was it about this movie that was so enthralling to audiences, and how might it be relevant again?
I don't know. I think, well, when you look at just so many of those guardrails that you talked about, those guardrails are kind of still with us now in so many ways, in terms of that they gave him this title, like, do something with this title, which is kind of absurd, but it almost feels like something out of, you think of like Robert Altman's The Player, like, go make a movie. It's almost absurd to go and just have a studio executive throw this ridiculous title in front of an artist and say to go figure something out. But that's kind of the way it all went down. And but again, I don't know, adjusting for inflation, like what $140 some odd thousand is in today's dollars in 1942, when this film was made. And it was made at Gower Studios in Gower Gulch in Los Angeles. They used sets that were left over from the Magnificent Ambersons, and there was just this sort of residual Orson Welles kind of this beginning of this new decade, this new era of filmmaking, and just the craft on display in this film, the photography, this sort of the way he lights snow, and the sort of almost like film noir kind of images, and the sort of tropes of a woman walking alone down the street at night in this incredibly riveting, suspenseful scene. I think it's Jane Randolph, right, who's walking alone, and she's being stalked by Simone Simon, and there's this moment where this bus comes screeching into frame, and it's like a huge jump scare moment where she's startled, but the bus is like probably saving her life because she can jump on it and not be devoured by a humanoid panther, if that's really what you're seeing. And it even just reading about like the origins of that sort of jump scare moment, it just, you're just seeing these sort of tropes and things that we've carried forward for so many years now. And I don't know. I just feel like you're witnessing sort of a lot of formative things happening with Cat People, that obviously were carried forth, through all the Lewton productions.
Yeah, well, that bus sequence is actually called the Lewton bus.
Yeah.
And it because it was so effective, it had whole entire theaters. If you ever screened this with the theater, and I got to do it once on 35, we were watching it. You watched the audience at certain times, like I watched the John Carpenter's The Thing with my kids. They had not seen it before for the first time during this pandemic. It's the perfect pandemic movie. And during the scene, the blood scene, I was like, just sort of, I filmed them losing their mind over that. But that's one of those sequences, and you could refer to that scene in The Thing as the Lewton bus. It's a jump scare that's like so fair, but also so startling and effective. But to your point, it is the wellspring of so many things. And you talk about the look of the movie. It's a cinematographer. His name was Nicholas Musaruka. And he did a bunch of really great movies. He did a bunch of noir films, including Jacques Tourneur's Noir Out of the Past, which is, for many, the quintessential noir, the Robert Mitchum and unbelievable film. But the requirement of noir, was that a lot of those movies too were on the cheap. They were genre films. They were seen as sort of, secondary B programmers or whatever. And the noir style, such as it was sort of evolved out of necessity. If you don't have big sets built out, then you have to have a lot of darkness and shadows. Had to be at night, maybe even raining. If you don't have like a good budget for building sets, then you had to do it in natural places. You had to use sunlight. You had to use the lamp on the desk. And so all the deep shadows and the slatted lights originally began not so much as a style, but as a budgetary issue. And the way that they were able to use that through Val Lewton's run at RKO, evolves the style, if you will, alongside a lot of other noir stuff. So I love this idea that Cat People and Val Lewton is the wellspring for a lot of these things. And, I as I was watching it, I'm reminded of so many major moments in Hitchcock that owe a great debt to Val Lewton too, that we can talk about. It would be easier to talk about if we were talking about all of Val Lewton's movies, but like even the psycho shower scene is taken kind of from a movie called The Seventh Victim that Val Lewton did during this period. So yeah, a lot of stuff is going on. But what I love about Cat People too is beyond the look of it, which is so much of it, is the use of ambiguity in describing its characters. And I wonder if you could talk about that too, because you're also quite good at that. And in your film, where nobody is 100% good and nobody is 100% bad in Cat People. So talk to me a little bit about the importance of ambiguity, and even your Panther person.
Well, I think that it's so important to try and create characters who are complex and have moral ambiguity is something that to me is so important to try and pursue when you are rendering fictional characters. But it's also something where you can come up against a lot of resistance in these sort of testing and filtration and curation that happens when you're making films today, when you have test audiences and you have studio executives who are often demanding. One of the big notes that you always get, that's like top 3 of the sort of boilerplate notes that you always get from a studio or from a studio executive about a character or your protagonist is the not likable. The protagonist isn't likable enough, or it isn't heroic, or isn't. So there's a sort of push for absolute sort of heroism, pure morality, a sort of almost like a puritanical push for characters to not have those complexities and not have those dark shadows. And there's always a push and a pull going back and forth. And to see that, at the beginning of the 1940s, that a film was able to sort of lay the groundwork for so many of the things that we're seeing today. It's just, I don't know, it's important to study the past and understand that these battles are continually fought decade after decade after decade, I guess.
Well, I think it's fascinating too that the hero of the movie initially should be Kent, right? The Kent Smith character, Oliver, the husband.
Yeah. Oliver Reed is his character's name. Yeah.
Oliver Reed, strangely enough, is the character. Yeah, but he's like so stolid and boring, right? He's like the all-American guy, and he should be the hero. And then even before anything supernatural happens, he starts like flirting with Alice, with the Jane Randolph character. You know, there's that scene in the office that I've seen this movie dozens of times, but now that's the part of it. The first hour or so of the film, of a 75-minute film, the first hour of it is really what gets me now is that he begins this flirtation at the office. He says, I don't know. I'm not so sure about the marriage anymore. But he's confiding in Alice. And Alice says, you'll always be tops in my book. And this is really painful to see this happening because we like Irina, don't we? She's innocent and she's, sweet and tortured somehow, dark. But, he's immediately beginning to cheat on her even before, they're married. It's really painful. So he's discarded as a hero. So the next hero maybe is the doctor, the psychiatrist, Louis Judd, played by Tom Conway, and then he turns out to be. So all of these sort of upsettings of traditional things of good, right? The marriage of medicine of things that are traditionally solid are being displaced during the course of this movie, and I don't know that we actually do that very much anymore in our film 80 years later.
Yeah, it's really kind of startling to see again how many of these archetypes that we just can transplant over really 8 decades now. And you think about, beyond the thematics of this film, just the idea of cat people was 2 words that were put in front of these artists, to come up with this story. And now we have IP is this word that everyone in Hollywood throws around, the idea of intellectual property. And it's all that anyone talks about in terms of like seizing upon something, a brand, a title, something that is recognizable or that is digestible or that can be consumed by an audience very easily. And the idea of jump scares, the Lewton bus is something that, there's almost like this requirement that a film must have a certain number of those bus moments, that where the audience jumps out of their seat. I guess someone told me a story, maybe it was Joel Silver or someone who dubbed those kinds of moments, whammo moments or something, a moment where, there's a car crash or someone gets stabbed or, something violent happens or something that lurches the audience to sit forward. And it's, again, those are the moments that you can see that are guardrails in today's sort of studio filmmaking, the sort of rubric of studio filmmaking now, in terms of like, what do you need to do in order to get your film on 3,000 screens? Like, what are the requirements, and I think you even see it, drifting into kind of television now too, where like, if you want to sell a TV pilot now, you have to have a dead body at the end of episode 1 in order to hook your audience in, So these sort of genre tropes that began, in a lot of ways in this era, right, when Cat People was made, it's just like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we're sort of reliving these sort of cycles of the challenges of creating these stories and getting them in front of audiences. It's interesting to see how the cycles repeat themselves.
So how do you imagine the reception of Cat People has changed from the time that came out, where it would be kind of risque, you know, in a lot of ways. But now, in which, you know, I think watching it just this morning in preparation for this today, I approached it really differently. You know, just in terms of sexual politics and how things changed. Can you talk a little bit about how this movie is evolving, and you know, with our conversation and becoming maybe deepening as it ages, as opposed to other films that maybe just kind of go away?
Well, gosh, I mean, there's so much that you can read into this film. We can also kind of get into what Paul Schrader then did with remaking Cat People in 1982, you know, 40 years later. But kind of the idea of transformation, the sort of the deep thematic subtext of you know, Irina, but also this sort of ancient lineage of people who are transforming into animals, and kind of there's an enormous sort of subtext that you can dig into the idea there with transformation. But I just the sort of sexual dynamics, the idea of Irina being unable to kiss, unable to you know, have affection, physical affection with her partner, for unleashing this curse. And obviously, when Paul Schrader remade the film 40 years later, he really advanced all of that into a much more gonzo, you know, it's very 1982 in the sense of the way he sort of exploded a lot of those things into a new era, and the sort of sexual dynamics that he brought forward were pretty wild.
Well,
it's a very subversive movie. Yeah, from the beginning, it was very subversive, but very tasteful and elegant in its way. But interesting to see how it has sort of exploded with the remake. Yeah.
I think you really nail it when you talk about the sexual elements and sexual politics of this film, especially in Irina's character, who is really victimized, I think, by her husband. I mean, and by the psychiatrist. This sort of falls in the tradition of the Gothic, because it's a crazy woman, quote unquote, movie, where the woman's nuts. You know, that at some point, you know, her wanting to take agency over her sexuality and make decisions about who she sleeps with, and when she does it, makes her crazy. And so she's got to go see a doctor, and maybe if it's Jane Eyre, she gets locked in the attic, or you know, she's Anne Boleyn, she gets her head cut off. And so, you know, all these sexual politics about a woman's sexuality, about a woman's willingness to have sex with a particular man, kind of is embedded here. And it still is extraordinarily threatening to men. You know, how dare women have agency over their own sexuality? How dare women choose who to have sex with, especially if we're married? If we're married, we might as well be. And Hitchcock, you know, kind of runs with that with Marnie, right? And if you've not seen Marnie, spoiler alert, you should have seen it by now. But you know, Sean Connery actually rapes Tippi Hedren on their wedding night, because now they're married. It's not rape anymore, you know, but it causes her to try to kill herself. And Marnie is, you know, really heavily influenced by Curse of the Cat People. The same mother-daughter dynamic in Marnie is begun in Curse of the Cat People, with the aging actress and her daughter. I love Curse of the Cat People. It's so great. But yeah, the sexual politics of Cat People are extraordinarily, I think, progressive in that way. In that, you know, the bad guys are Alice, who says, you know, I'm a different kind of other woman. I'm the new type of other woman. You know, the sort of flip hip kind of, yeah, we're going to cheat on Irina for no other reason than Irina doesn't want to have sex with you right now. That's why. And that kind of justification doesn't fly in Cat People, even if she's, you know, made to be the monster, made to be the whatever thing. What's really awakened in her is not sort of the you know, sex doesn't make her the monster. It's, for me, in Cat People anymore, it's that kind of societal betrayal makes her into a monster. And good for her. I want to see a whole line of, you know, Cat People where she's just kind of emptying out gymnasiums all across the country. So yeah, you know, to your point, the sexual politics of it are, for 1942, for any time, extraordinarily progressive.
Yeah, I just watched the Paul Schrader remake. Like it was the first time I'd seen it, and I'd heard so much about it. I'd seen clips of it, and famously the David Bowie song from Cat People was reused by Quentin Tarantino in Inglourious Bastards. I think that's the song from Cat People, right? That he that it when the actress, the French actress from Inglourious Bastards. Oh God, her name is escaping me at the moment. But she's planning the big assault. When all the Nazis are going to come to the theater, and she's planning the big attack. And she's looking out the window in that beautiful kind of shot where she's just sort of staring down over the theater marquee and everything. And that song plays. It sort of brought Cat People kind of back into a lot of people's consciousness and everything. But watching Schrader's remake, which was exec produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, and it was released by Universal, and it's this really, really perverse, very twisted, very sexual, very violent film that it's really just wild to look at that and to think that's 40 years ago, but sort of the beginning of the Reagan era. And we were mentioning when I'm not sure what year Tony Scott directed The Hunger, but this sort of beginning of a new era, and just comparing the dynamics, from 1942 to 1982, and just some of the wild stuff in that film. I mean, there's a scene. One of the things you always see and you notice, particularly in movies in the 70s and 80s, is like just things like cigarette smoking. So there's a scene in Cat People, the Paul Schrader version, where Malcolm McDowell has this basement dungeon where he's been transforming into a panther, and he's been just devouring and mutilating all these dead bodies. So there's all these like mutilated skeletons and bodies and just blood and guts and bones everywhere, and this like fresh crime scene. And the detective, who's played by the actor Frankie Faison, who you might remember from Silence of the Lambs, he just lights up a cigarette, like standing over this freshly discovered crime scene, and just lights up a smoke, And so there's sort of like these just moments that are almost just so defined by that particular era that you would never see in a film today,
Well, we should talk about that scene, because that, it's awesome. The whole movie's awesome. It's not conventionally entertaining, but awesome. That whole scene that you're talking about, though, when you go into a basement, and there's a scene in the original Cat People where she goes downstairs in a museum, she gets kind of dismissed by the couple looking at ships, so she goes in the basement, she stands there wearing black, and they're wearing like kind of light gray. They're paired, and she's not. She's a denizen of the underworld in a way. She goes downstairs, and she stands next to a statue of Anubis, sort of the Egyptian god of rebirth in the underworld. And there's a lot of Freudian shit going on in the original Cat People. The dream sequence that Hitchcock lists for Spellbound is very Freudian, with the psychiatrist with a giant, pen, and Okay, so in the remake, what's brilliant about Schrader is that he's a really good film critic, just like Tarantino's a really good film critic. They're both almost better film critics than they are directors, and I like them both as directors, but really good film critic. And he understands about a lot of the stuff that's in the original that's just sort of there. So in his remake, his brilliant remake in many ways, he comments on the original by having a basement. And the basement with the God of the Dead is literally littered with body pieces. And he lights a cigarette, which is a very Freudian thing to do. So, the detective now is a very noir thing to do too, is lighting a noir cigarette. His masculine ratiocinational powers are on fire now in this Jungian basement of the subconscious. And so, you can say, all right, this is, of course, it's a thing of its time and everything and all that. And I still remember you could smoke on airplanes. I'm really quite elderly, but it's also a really kind of stunning commentary about the original film. And that's what I think that people that dismiss remakes are idiots, kind of, because there's so much good stuff in these fairy tales that you can keep figuring for each generation, and you should. I mean, there's 4 different versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers because society keeps changing, but the story continues to remain relevant. If we were to remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all of the pods would be wearing red hats and voting for, you know, game show host. And so there's something really eternal about some of these images. So I want to pose this question to you: if you were to redo Cat People in 2021, another 40 years on, right? What are the elements that you would be fascinated about or interested in pulling forward? What drives the story today, I guess, is the question.
Oh God, I that's there. I guess there's so many things that you could probably pursue. If someone were to try to remake this movie again, I mean, just the idea of transformation and what that means in today's world. I would say you would not be allowed to show someone smoking on screen, probably, because there are studios that literally ban that. You cannot. You cannot. There's some studios where literally they will not let you show a character smoking a cigarette in any scene, even if the character is a bad guy or a serial killer. They literally, it's forbidden. So it's interesting to see how you know, you can show the most violent, gory, you know, people getting shot and killed and the most violent thing possible, but to show someone smoking a cigarette on screen is, you know, again, I'm not promoting smoking or anything, but I don't know. Thinking about Cat People today, hypothetically, I mean, I think that there's a whole new world of the discussion of animal rights and cruelty to animals and the game hunting and just everything that all the way culture has evolved in terms of our relationship with animals. All of the sort of sexual politics could probably be updated in a significant way. You know,
well, you keep using the term, you know, transformation, and it makes me think about, you know, gender politics, like
Yeah.
identity politics and stuff, and how Cat People becomes a very malleable text in order to discuss a lot of those issues as well, of issues of how people present and how people, you know, what people are to themselves, you know, as opposed to what they present to the world, and you know, that question and that really delicate sort of interplay is perfect for genre film, which traditionally, you know, has been the first to show stuff, you know, the first to deal with stuff.
Yeah.
You know, Night of the Living Dead is the best civil rights film ever made. You know, it's a horror film. It's the first to be able to be allowed to do things like that. You know, I find that horror films, genre films, sometimes escape some of those guardrails you're talking about because studios aren't paying as close of attention. They're like, yeah, go ahead. You know, and if you watch Halloween Kills, the new Halloween movie, it's the most nihilistic and unpleasant mainstream studio film that I've seen in a long time, maybe ever. And it's so unpleasant and so bleak. And I'm not sure that they would have gotten away with it if it was, you know, a prestige movie with Meryl Streep. I think it gets away with it because it's a horror movie and people aren't watching as closely. And I think it's important to make those movies, but yeah, I think there's something to be said about genre that you know, as a place of real freedom of expression still.
Yeah.
Stuff. So we should get a couple of questions before we let it go too long.
Richard asked if you could see this film as a film noir. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Richard, go ahead. I'll let you go.
It is the original Cat People as a film noir.
Mhm.
To me, I mean, I don't know if it's officially, if people would classify it as officially a noir, but there's so many elements of it that I fit into those tropes in terms of the mysterious femme fatale, the sort of the cheating spouse, the love triangle, the betrayal, the sort of so many of the sequences with the shadows and the sort of stalking on the street, the whole sequence with famous sequence really with Jane Randolph in the underground swimming pool, which was shot in a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Can't remember the name of the hotel, but this sort of incredibly tense really suspenseful. Again, she's swimming alone by herself in the way the light passes across the wall and the sound design. There are just so many elements of Cat People that definitely tread heavily in the film noir direction. Absolutely.
And I think it's definitely informed by the same societal elements that formed film noir. And it's the nation at war, obviously, in 1942. We're just sort of getting into it at this point. And women are going into the workforce. They're becoming Rosie the Riveters. They're contributing to the war effort in a way. And by doing so, they're discarding sort of traditional gender roles for women in the United States. And that's threatening to a lot of men. And so noir sort of begins to evolve out of this with the threatening woman, who's threatening for her sexuality, who's threatening for her individualism and her need, her lack of need for a man. And I think film noir informs that, and Cat People definitely is on that train as well. And the deep Freudian stuff that's really popular. Freud was a fad in the United States in the 1930s and 40s. People loved Freud. Freud was like he was like Che Guevara. They'd be wearing Freud t-shirts. They loved Freud, including Hitchcock, all the way through Spellbound in 1945. But they were all going through psychoanalysis. It was a big deal. So the Freudian elements in Cat People are not accidental. That's part of the sort of zeitgeist, if you can use an overused term, of that period as well. But also film noir. Cigarettes in film noir are very seldom just cigarettes. They're usually held by people who have information and have knowledge, and the way that you pass cigarettes and the way that you light cigarettes. And so, again, Cat People is here. Here we are with tracing the movements of phallic symbols throughout Cat People. If you remember the drawing that we see at the beginning that she's ripped up is a panther that's been stabbed through with a saber, and indeed she's stabbed later with a saber. There's penetration that's not sexual but becomes sexual for violent men. All this stuff, right? It's very much film noir, and just down to the look of it that we've talked about. For me, it's a noir. However it's a horror noir, and there are a few of those. Angel Heart, one of my favorite horror noirs of all time. Yeah. All right, any other questions or comments about that for us?
Let's see. So Brian said, "I love the moment in the cafe after the wedding when the other woman addresses our heroine as her sister, and then it leads nowhere. Any idea whether that was something that was cut out of the final film? It's interesting to just leave it there." And Schrader repeats this moment in the other one.
So that is an actress / model named Elizabeth Russell, who was just sort of hired on for half a day of shooting by Lewton for her looks. She looked like a cat to him, and just like Simone Simon did as well. And so you brought her in. There was nothing more to that, and I think you'll find a lot of that sort of obliqueness in Lewton's films as you work through them. Is that he's got ideas, and he's got a lot of ideas mainly about mood, and that certainly sets a mood. It's one of the most memorable scenes in the film. That's not a jump scare or not the swimming pool sequence. This is the sequence a lot of people talk about. Is like, who is that person? What do you mean sister? And what it does is it suggests, in a way that the sets can't, in a way that the budget doesn't allow, it suggests a hugeness to this universe in the film that outside of the boundaries of what the film is able to tell, because of all the guardrails that are put in place with it, outside of that boundary, there is an endless well of, a bottomless well of story and history here. And Richard, you touched on that a little bit with the Schrader remake, about how deeply he dives into the backstory and the folklore behind these Cat People.
Yeah, I mean, in the opening of Schrader's film, it opens with this long zoom out from these sort of skulls in sort of a desert, embedded in desert sand and wind blowing past, and in this sort of strange, you don't know what year it is, but it's almost like this ancient time, and there's this sort of sacrificial moment with a woman being brought up to a tree and all of these panthers, and it's very 1982, when you've got David Bowie and the score playing, and a lot of that is just only kind of hinted at or done in a different way in the 1942 Cat People, but the moment where that actress shows up at the dinner party, the engagement party, it's a very haunting, sort of very memorable moment in the film that it almost reminds me a lot of moments that we see in David Lynch films, when you see just a strange woman or a strange unique person showing up. Just the sort of inspired casting of just like a day player who can just be one of the most memorable parts of a film, and how important it is to focus on the details and the little small tiny details that kind of come into a frame, even just for a moment, and how much depth and detail that can bring to a film.
So after Cat People, Lewton did I Walked with a Zombie, which was also a minor hit. It did well, although it lost a lot of its audience. The people who would have liked it the most didn't go see it because of the title, ironically. And then the Leopard Man did really well. It has one of the scariest scenes in any picture of ever made. Stephen King writes about it in his Dance Macabre book. Then he did a movie called The Seventh Victim, which is absolutely brilliant. It stars Kim Hunter as a girl looking for her sister who's gone missing in New York. Then he did a movie called Ghost Ship, and Ghost Ship is not what it sounds like. It's about bad managers, and it's really great. It's really great. But there was a lawsuit around Ghost, a spurious lawsuit that Val Lewton had plagiarized parts of the script, and he hadn't, but they won. And so Ghost Ship was kind of lost for 50 years. This has recently been sort of rediscovered and reacclimated, but it was a blow. And so after those movies, after that movie didn't do well, it had to get pulled, the Ghost Ship, Lewton was asked to go back to Cat People with the title The Curse of the Cat People. So the sequel actually features in a pretty major role the actress who plays the woman in the cafe. And in that one, that actress plays the daughter of an old lady who lives in a house in a manor in the middle of the wood, that the hero of that movie, a little girl named Amy, discovers on her adventures through the woods and runs to late at night, one night in the middle of a snowstorm after a terrible nightmare again. Simone Simon reprises her role. You may ask how, but she haunts them. And Kent is back, and Oliver Reed is back, and Alice is back, and they're married now, and Amy is their daughter, and it's how Cat People sort of becomes a different kind of fairy tale mythology. There's fairy rings, and there's mailboxes and trees, and all of this stuff from Val Lewton's own childhood that he brought into Curse of the Cat People. It's amazing. But this actress does make another appearance in another Cat People movie, and if you were sharp-eyed, if you at the time were looking at this, and us as scholars now, as we're looking back and fans, there's some kind of weird connection again, right, to a greater, larger mythology. Whatever's mulling around inside of Val Lewton's head, he brought this actress back to be in a movie about a little girl being haunted by this cat person, and that's fascinating. And it's a fascinating film, and you should see it. So anyway,
there's great continuity between the two films. I went into the sequel not knowing what to expect at all, but virtually the entire cast from the original film is back, but it's a much different kind of film. Robert Wise, is that his first co-credit or his credit as a director? Yep. There's a lot of great behind the scenes drama that you can read about in the sort of trivia surrounding both films. But one of the things that's really just beautiful in the filmmaking of both films, but particularly the sequel, is this sort of winter forest. There's this whole elaborate kind of chase sequence through this winter wonderland forest where the little girl she's kind of on the run and she could freeze to death, and the parents are looking for her, and the authorities are looking for her, and it's this sort of wonderfully, beautifully rendered sequence. Just the black and white photography and the way that I'm assuming they just built this big forest set and just reused different angles to make it look like it's this gigantic forest. But I don't know how much of a soundstage they had at the budget they had. I think the budget was a little higher in the sequel. It was around $200,000. and I don't know what the inflation adjustment is for, but it's still a low budget film for the time.
Yeah, it
but just
was
the
shot
way,
largely on a set that was built for another movie. I think it was a Jimmy Stewart movie that they had at RKO, you know. And so
Yeah.
like, again, it's like they're just reusing what they had. Yeah.
But that forest, the way that they keep changing the camera angle and maybe moving the trees around, it's so beautifully made, and just the direction is just it's pretty stellar.
Yeah, well, I'm actually really touched by Elizabeth Russell, the actress, the cat lady in the first one, and then her evolution into Barbara in the second film as completely American, because there's a sense of alienness about, like, as in terms of like a foreign alienness about Simone Simon and her accent and her inability to fit in. I mean, the flirtation early on is just like, how do you spell that? You know, there's all this horrible kind of stuff that we get used to by being obviously different, right? You know, I've been asked to spell my name 10 billion times in my lifetime. That's because, okay. But by the time of the sequel, she is actually a representation of home and succor. Not initially, she's like antagonistic, but by the end of it, she's the person that gives out the hug, that says that the child is safe. And there's something touching about the immigrant story that Val Lewton is telling, about his own story as an immigrant coming over here and being different. But there's a touching immigrant story that's connecting all of his run at RKO as well. And specifically in this little tiny character of Elizabeth Russell from the first film to the second film, becoming an agent that suggests a great world of alien difference, into a representative of welcoming at home and safety and security by the time of, in just 3 years time. And I think that's really a touching, extra textual read perhaps of that character. So thank you for that question, an opportunity to address that. We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Okay. Katarines was asking about the dream sequence. Any thoughts on that, with the dream sequence with like the key and the cats and the sword thing?
Yeah, now the dream sequence, is that in the first film or the second film?
There's dream sequences in both films.
Right, but there's a guy with a sword, like almost like a knight with a sword.
That's the first film.
Oh, that's in the first film. Okay. I was wondering, was that a reference to the is it a Serbian folk tale or Romanian? Was that I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Tom Conway, who, by the way, is George Sanders' brother. Okay. He was always referred to as the nice George Sanders. But I don't know why that's funny to me. But the dream sequence is really interesting to me in a Freudian way, you know, obviously, and that there's so many penetrating devices in this movie, penetrative devices, including a key, including, you know, a sword and the sword cane that, you know, the good doctor reveals at one point. Interestingly enough, that doctor, Dr. Louis Judd, played by Tom Conway, appears in the movie The Seventh Victim, the Val Lewton film. So that The Seventh Victim now becomes a prequel, if you like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's the Easter egg. That's a prequel to the Cat People movies. Anyway, it's the same doctor. He's a perv. He's terrible. But there's something about the dream that indicates that there's like something suspicious about this character, and perhaps about psychoanalysis as a whole. You know, I don't know Val Lewton's thoughts about psychoanalysis, but it does seem as though he's more suspicious of psychoanalysis than other filmmakers at the time. Like Spellbound by Hitchcock is kind of an ode to psychoanalysis. He stops worshiping at the altar of Freud, Hitchcock, pretty quickly. I mean, by Psycho, the psychiatrist at the end is sort of a joke, and I think meaningfully a joke. He kind of discards the usefulness of Freudian analysis to what makes Norman. That shrinks Simon Oakland has no idea. But here, I think in Cat People early, in our Freud fascination, here's Val Lewton saying, you know, all this modern stuff that you want to put on top of these old legends and folklores and mythologies, including what I'm doing now, don't do very much in uncovering the real hearts of darkness here. The real seething gender politics and the way that women are used and gaslit and abused throughout history, and the way that men are with wanting to poke things all the time, that he's suspicious already. And these are the images that he's throwing out to us, I think, in this film early on that Irene is having this dream of like, wait a minute, all these men are trying to stab me. I would like very much not to be stabbed, and by anything that a man could stab me with. And so there's something touching about that, about this woman who's like, well, I can't win exactly, but I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. And that's, I think, the how I would read that dream. And the beauty of Cat People, though, the beauty of any kind of good art and good text is that that's not the only way to read it. There's a lot of ways to go with that, but it's a really rich text. Maybe one. Oh, we are over time. I'm so sorry. Okay, so we're gonna play out today with the music video for one of my favorite songs of my misspent adolescence that Richard uses so brilliantly in both cuts of his Donnie Darko. It's Echo and the Bunnymen. Echo is the name of their drum machine, strangely enough. Echo and the Bunnymen's The Killing Moon. Richard, I can't thank you enough for choosing this movie and for being here with us today. Richard, thank you so very much.
And thank you for your wonderful insight and your incredible knowledge. It's a real thrill to hear. I can listen to Walter talk for hours. So I'm really excited to as a fan, to come to more of these events. Thank you to the Denver Public Library and everyone. It's been a great time.
Well, I promise I'm a bigger fan of you than you could be of me. And there's so many amazing projects that are upcoming for you that I know that you can't talk about, but man,
fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But you're what we have, what you've given us already is brilliant, man. And so
there's going to be a lot more. I promise there's going to be a lot more. It's taking forever, but it's going to happen, I hope.
Can't wait. So if you guys have not seen Donnie Darko or Southland Tales or The Box, please remedy that as soon as possible. And Richard, thank you again. Everybody have a great Saturday. Please be safe.
Great. Thank you, guys.